Dunfermline stands in the kingdom of Fife, and any proud Fifer will tell you that at one time it was Scotland's ancient capital. It's dominated by its 11th century abbey. In this abbey lies one of Scotland's greatest ever kings. For here, Robert I, King of Scots, more commonly known as Robert the Bruce, was laid to rest. As you walk around Dunfermline, you can tell, you can sense, it's a place of great historic importance. But the story I'm going to tell you today is one of love, jealousy and betrayal. Pittencrieff Park, Dunfermline is a lovely, beautiful, tranquil place. An area people will walk their dogs, they'll cycle and play with their children, or simply stroll on a nice day, enjoying the beauty of the flowers. But amidst this beauty and tranquility, something terrible took place in the park on the 1st of July, 1912. Joseph Anderson was deeply in love with his sweetheart, Elizabeth Cowan. The Dunfermline barman, who admitted getting pangs of jealousy, was upset, as Elizabeth, or Lizzie as we shall now call her, wanted to work in a tea room in the town's Pittencrieff Park. Joe was worried that working in the tea rooms might be bad for Lizzie's health, as she had already suffered from a bout of pneumonia. At least that was the excuse he was willing to tell people for his anxiety and jealousy he felt towards Lizzie. Lizzie Cowan already had a job in one of the factories in the town, but she'd been offered a start in the tea rooms in the park. She'd even done a couple of shifts there already. This planned job change had led to arguments between the couple, who had been engaged for about a year. After an argument, Joe was known to go into long bouts of silence, refusing to speak to Lizzie. The latest disagreement had led to the silent treatment from Joe, and Lizzie had decided that she was going to call off the engagement and have nothing more to do with Joseph Anderson. Joe told his friend, James Johnson, about his fallout with Lizzie and that he was fed up and planned to leave Dunfermline. On the 1st of July, 1912, Anderson turned up at his work in the Green Tree Tavern in Bruce Street. Joe asked his employer, Francis Danks, if he could get away for an hour. Danks asked Anderson if he needed more time. Joe said no, an hour was sufficient. Francis had been worried about Joe, as he had been acting nervous and excitable, impulsive, and had very changeable moods. Joe had been forgetting to carry out tasks asked of him by his employer, and suffering from severe headaches. Danks had warned Joe about the amount of headache powder he was taking, warning Joe that he would kill himself. Anderson replied to this warning, "I don't care. The pain in my head is so severe." Joe Anderson left his work at about 3 in the afternoon. He popped into the Royal Oak Bar, where his friend James Johnson worked as a barman. Joe had a whisky. James asked his friend if anything was wrong, but did not get any answer. As he left the Royal Oak, Joe shook hands with Johnson and said, "We have been pals for years. I'm far away." When asked what he meant, Joe simply replied, "You will hear later." Joe then walked into Pittencrieff Park.
Explore Castle Menzies after dark.
Is it really haunted?
Is it really haunted?
Book now to find out.
If you dare.
Where he saw Lizzie Cowan walking with her cousin, William Gowdy. When the couple saw Joe approach, William asked after him, and Lizzie asked what he was doing in the park, to which Joe replied he was out walking. Joe asked William if he could walk with Lizzie, and after agreeing, William watched Joe and Miss Cowan walk off. Joe and Lizzie were talking. Soon their voices were raised. Joe grabbed his ex-sweetheart by the neck, and Lizzie screamed. Joe Anderson then pulled out a revolver pistol from his jacket pocket and shot Lizzie Cowan in the chest. Joe ran off, pursued by several witnesses, including Police Superintendent James Dunnigan. The policeman had heard a woman scream and, thinking it was just a fight, went over to restore order. Joe Anderson stopped running, turned around and faced these pursuing him, pointed the gun towards his head and pulled the trigger. Joe fell practically at the feet of the policeman. As he fell, he dropped the still smoking gun on the ground. Later, a gun licence dated that day, the 1st of July, and a note written on an envelope with the words, "I can stand this no longer. Love and jealousy, Joe," and "Someone put a bullet in me," was found. George Rankin, a medical student, was sitting in the tea rooms in the park when he heard a gunshot. Running in the direction of the gunfire, he saw a young woman lying on the ground. Anderson was wounded, and Rankin stayed with him until a Dr. Sturrock arrived. As he turned to help Joe, he groaned and said, "Someone put a bullet in me." William Gowdy ran towards his cousin when he heard the shot. When he got to where Elizabeth Cowan lay motionless on the grass, he could see a bullet hole in her left breast, and that she was dead. Joseph Anderson was taken to the West Fife Hospital with serious gunshot injuries to his head. Anderson was treated in hospital for the next 10 days. On the 11th of July 1912, he was taken to the county buildings in Dunfermline High Street, and you can see the county buildings at the far end of this postcard. It is reported that Anderson presented a pitiable sight. He was escorted into the building by 2 constables and given a chair to sit on. The bandages had been removed from his head, and the entry wound on his right cheek could be seen, as could the exit wound on his left temple. Deathly pale, and with his father in attendance, the charge was read out. Anderson had to stop the proceedings, claiming that he could not hear what was being said. The fiscal walked closer to the chair Anderson sat on and read the charges once again in a loud voice. Asked if he had anything to say, the prisoner stated no. Anderson was led out of the building, where a crowd of several hundred people had gathered. The prisoner was put into a car and conveyed 30 miles north to Perth prison, where he was put on trial at the Circuit Court in Perth in the 2nd week of August. The car made its way to Perth. The policeman thought that there might be a crowd and members of the press at the prison waiting for them. As he entered Perth, the car drove right past the prison gates, where, according to the Evening Telegraph newspaper dated the 11th of July, hardly a soul waited at the jail. The car drove down the Edinburgh Road and stopped at Marshall Place. This ruse worked, as the only reporter at the jail jumped on his bicycle and sped off after the police car. The occupants in the car waited until this reporter came into view, then turned back and sped up towards the prison gates, leaving the frustrated news hack in its wake. Joseph Anderson was tried at the Perth Circuit Court on the 15th of August 1912. The prisoner pled not guilty, with the defence that he was insane and not responsible for his actions at the time of the shooting. The court heard that on the day of the killing, Joe had obtained a pistol from a gun shop in Dunfermline's High Street. Among the witnesses was the deceased's 18-year-old sister, Margaret Cowan. Margaret spoke of Joseph's jealousy and the fact he did not want Lizzie Cowan to work at the tea house in Pittencrieff Park. Witnesses to the event on that fateful day on the 1st of July told their version of events. 2 apprentice grocers, James Beveridge and John Loudon, told of hearing screams and going to investigate. Both of them saw a young man wrestling with a girl. Running to the girl's aid, they heard the shot and saw the girl fall to the ground. James and John took off after Joseph and saw him hold a gun to his head and shoot himself. A lot of medical evidence was heard, with Dr. Peter Sturrock of Dunfermline stating that in his opinion Anderson's mind was perfectly clear and free from mental disease. This was backed by Dr. James Sturrock of Perth Prison and Dr. Benjamin Alcock from Murray Royal Asylum in Perth, who both agreed that Joseph Anderson was sane at the time of the shooting and knew exactly what he was doing. Anderson's mother was called by the defence, and she told the court that her son had suffered from epilepsy for many years. Dr. Bruce from the Murphley Asylum stated that he had examined Anderson 5 weeks after the crime, and he found no signs of insanity. The doctor did say that the shooting might have been the result of epileptic impulse. In the summing up, the Advocate Depute for the Crown stated that the crime was a deliberate act carried out by a perfectly sane man, while the defence argued it was not Anderson's intention to murder the girl, but to commit suicide, and that while struggling to dispose him of the revolver, Lizzie Cowan was shot. It was a complete accident. The jury only took 7 minutes to agree on a verdict and filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood and stated the jury had, to a man, all found Joseph Anderson guilty of culpable homicide. The judge then turned to address Anderson, and it is worth quoting Lord Dewar as he spoke to the man in the dock. This is what the judge stated. The jury has taken a very merciful and I think very just and proper view of the crime which you have committed. They have found you guilty of culpable homicide. It is, in my opinion, just on the borderline of murder. It is an extremely grave crime you have committed, and I regret I cannot look upon it under the circumstances with leniency. The sentence must be a long one. 15 years penal servitude. I think Joseph Anderson was extremely lucky to escape the hangman's noose. The fact that he went and bought a gun and said goodbye to his best friend on the day of the killing shows something terrible was planned by him that day. A tragic and misguided statement in front of his ex-fiancée. Mary Watson, a factory worker who worked alongside Elizabeth Cowan, had told the court during the trial that Lizzie had told her about Joe's jealousy. Watson had advised her friend, "If I was you, I would have nothing more to do with him." To this, Lizzie replied that she was afraid Anderson might do something to himself. So perhaps Lizzie's death was a sad and tragic accident. We will never know for sure. Elizabeth's grandfather, James Cowan, had been extremely ill. In fact, he was on his deathbed. Elizabeth's father had sat up that night with the old man before getting up and going to his work at Wallsend Colliery. During the day, Mr. Cowan received news that a messenger had come to the colliery with some sad news. Mr. Cowan must have felt sure that his father had passed away, but he would have been expecting this news and prepared himself. He must have been stunned when the messenger relayed the information that it wasn't his father that had died, but his daughter Elizabeth, murdered by her sweetheart. Elizabeth's grandfather died the day after her. Mr. Cowan Sr. was buried on the 4th of July in the old part of the Dunfermline cemetery, and just 2 hours later his granddaughter Elizabeth was laid to rest in the near part of the same graveyard. Amongst the many mourners at Lizzie Cowan's funeral was Alexander Anderson, Joe's father. The Dundee Courier printed on the 5th of July, called "The Killer's Father," a pathetic-looking figure. It must have been terrible, tragic and heartbreaking for Mr. Anderson to stand there amongst the friends and family of the woman his son had killed. I think that Anderson attending the funeral of Elizabeth was a very brave thing to do. He could easily have decided not to attend. So if you're ever in Pittencrieff Park, Dunfermline, please spare a thought for poor Elizabeth Cowan, brutally murdered, shot down in cold blood by her jealous ex-fiancé. If you've enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe. You might like to take one of our dark history tours, ghost tours, or paranormal investigations that are held in Perthshire, Glasgow and Stirling. If so, please visit our website, which is www.historyandhorrortours.com. Thank you.